Yes, I do have, I don't know if this needs to be on the record or not. Do you want us to answer the question and then go on the record?
Well, yeah, firstly, I was asking, are you ready to proceed?
Yes.
So what do you have, and I'll see if it needs to be on the record or not.
Yeah, I think what I mentioned in the interest of time, covering all witnesses on both, I think with the exception of our client, I think I may want to call him on our case in chief tomorrow. So I may just cover cross today with him, but with the other witnesses I anticipate from the city, I'll cover both, if that's okay.
Okay.
So, with the exception of Mr. Goins, you're saying you'd like to, so for purposes of questioning him today, you'd like to limit your questioning to the scope of my
Yes.
direct examination?
Yeah.
And then you're going to call him again tomorrow on your case?
Yes.
Okay.
But you don't want to do that for any of the other witnesses, is what you're saying?
Well, I think of all the other witnesses that remain, there may be, with the exception of, well, there may be two. Sergeant Vasquez, I don't know if you're planning to call him or not. And Mr. Cook, I assume you probably are going to call him. I mean, I can cover it.
Now, maybe.
I can cover it if that's the preference. I mean, it just may be a little bit longer. It'll be putting on, I might need 45 minutes to an hour with him on. I mean, I can do it today if that's the preference.
I would prefer to do that today, because in my experience last time, I think it took a while to get through day 2 with the grievance. So if we could get him out of the way today and all we have left is the remaining witnesses, that'd be my preference.
If that's,
Well, gentlemen, whatever you work out is up to you. But I'm hearing from Mr. Wilson that he would rather just put Mr. Goins up twice. Do a cross on him, since you called him in your case,
yeah.
as we come back from lunch. And then if need be, bring him back tomorrow as his witness in his case, and you'll cross him tomorrow.
I think it will be limited. That's my personal preference. It's going to be more into post-employment and, you know, some of the things that happen, that sort of thing. A little bit of
Because if he wants to recall Mr. Goins in his case, I want to give him that opportunity, so that, even though that's a little different than what we said at the beginning, that all the other witnesses will be up and down when they're called, on both sides.
right.
Okay, but what he's reserving, it sounds like, is to recall Mr. Goins tomorrow, if he has anything else to cover with him tomorrow that he doesn't cover on his cross coming back from lunch.
Yeah.
Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, just because he's the grievant, I would kind of like to have him, in my order, maybe go last. Is what I typically do.
Okay, and as long as it's not cumulative from what
Correct.
we've done today.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I'll hold you to that.
Okay.
That's fine.
What did you say?
I said I'll hold you to that.
Okay.
Fair
Okay,
enough.
so let's go back in the record then, and, you ready, Ms. Simpson? Okay. Okay, we took a.
No, I didn't.
Oh, yeah.
Mr. Goins, you want to go back? For the record, we took a 1-hour lunch. We're coming back at about 1:17. Both of the attorneys asked to have an additional 15 minutes for their preparation during lunch hour, which is fine with me. Mr. Goins, you're still under oath. We're still in Mr. DeRozier's case on direct. And what we talked about while off the record in lunch was that the attorneys have stipulated differently than their stipulation this morning, that as to Mr. Goins, when Mr. Wilson does any examination of him today, that's only as to his direct testimony today, and Mr. Wilson reserves the right to recall Mr. Goins tomorrow in his case in chief, which Mr. DeRozier's has stipulated to, so long as it's not cumulative with the testimony today. Did I say that correct, Mr. Wilson?
Yes, sir, you did.
Mr. DeRozier?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You may proceed, Mr. DeRozier.
All right. Mr. Goins, you understand you're still under oath, sir?
Yes, I did.
And I'm sorry, Mr. Finnegan, I'm terribly sorry. There are 2 individuals in the room that weren't here before lunch. I just wanted, I don't know if they're anticipated to be witnesses by the city. One is this gentleman right here, I'm not sure who he is. And the other is the young lady in the back. So if we could just find out who they are. But,
Okay.
That's my father-in-law.
oh, okay, very good.
Sir, what is your name so we can put it in the record?
William Freeman.
Thank you. And, Matt?
I'm Ada Hanner, the information Altercation Specialist with the city.
Okay.
Great.
What was the title?
H-A-N-N-A-R.
You're a title.
Oh, Community Information Specialist.
Okay.
Hey, do you mind, Mark, if we have the door closed? Just
Okay.
For, because we are, have invoked the rule. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Wilson, does that satisfy you?
Yes, sir. It
Okay.
does. Thank you.
So go ahead, Mr. DeRozers.
Just to ask you one more time, Mr. Goins, you understand you're still under oath, sir?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Could you please open the city exhibit book to tab 6? I'll give you a few moments, could you please just review the documents that are in the book at tab 6, sir?
Can I remove it? You're disabled,
This is something.
Also, do you recognize that document, sir?
yes.
Do you recognize that to be the criminal case file with respect to Mr. Staff?
Yes.
And that includes your supplemental arrest report, sir,
Yes.
as well as Mr. LaFleur's arresting affidavit.
Yes.
At this time, I ask that we move City Tab 6 into evidence.
No objection.
Just have a few questions for you, Mr. Goins. You testified earlier that prior to you executing your supplement, which is one of the documents contained in City Tab 6, that you didn't have a conversation with Mr. LaFleur, correct?
That's perfectly valid.
And it was also your testimony that prior to Mr. LaFleur executing his arresting affidavit, you guys didn't have a conversation, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And it's also your testimony that you operated under the assumption that Mr. Staff was under arrest the entire time when you were on the scene, correct?
Yes.
And Mr. LaFleur never told you that he was under arrest, correct?
Yes.
So at the time that you executed this supplemental report, you had not confirmed whether or not Mr. Staff was indeed already under arrest, correct?
Are you talking about when I submitted it? Or wrote the report?
Wrote the report, sir.
Not that I recall.
Okay, so you swore in this report that Mr. Staff was under arrest, correct?
Yes.
But you had not confirmed at any point prior to drafting this report So you testified that you had not spoke with Mr. LaFleur prior to you executing this supplemental report, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So, and at that point then, when you were writing this report, no one had confirmed for you that Mr. Staff was indeed under arrest, correct?
Not that I can recall, but
Okay.
I can recall that.
Okay, I have no further questions at this time.
Mr. Wilson, you may
Okay,
examine.
thank you, Mr. Finnegan.
Mr. Goins.
Mr. Goins, I'm going to, my questions on cross might be a little out of order. I'm going to just cover some of the things you have been asked about here today. I'm going to start in reverse order. If you look, you may already have it open there to City's Exhibit 6, the one you were just looking at, which is your supplemental report. Tell me when you're there, sir.
My supplement report, yes.
Yes, sir.
In there.
Okay. Now, your supplement report has your typewritten name at the bottom. Do you see that, sir?
Yes.
And is that your signature outside it?
Yes.
Okay. Now, this supplement report is not sworn to under oath, is it?
Just supplement, no.
Whereas if you turn back 2 pages to the actual charging affidavit, the 2-page charging affidavit, you see that, sir?
Yes.
And that's signed by Officer LaFleur, correct?
Yes, that is.
And that one does have a box that says sworn to and subscribed by the undersigned. You see that?
Yes.
Okay. And that's officer, that was your fellow officer that signed this 2-page charging affidavit, correct?
That's correct.
And am I correct, this may be beneficial for all of us, you've served as a law enforcement officer. Outside of the chief in this room, you're the only one that, well, and I'm sorry, Mr. Cook to my right is a retired officer, but is the person who writes the charging affidavit, in this case, Officer LaFleur, is it usually the lead officer on the scene that writes the report?
Correct.
Is that why, to your understanding, Officer LaFleur wrote this report?
Correct.
And you've told us under oath today that you did not read this charging affidavit signed under oath by Officer LaFleur before you wrote your narrative supplement. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And again, your narrative was not sworn to, correct? Did you still try to make it accurate based on your understanding of what happened?
Yes.
And do you understand, Officer Goins, that there is a belief by the chief who led the drive to have you terminated, that you and Officer LaFleur got together and fabricated part of the story to support the arrest of Mr. Staff? Are you aware of that?
Yes.
And are you further aware that there's a belief that the two of you somehow collaborated on your report to make the possession charge, the drugs found on Mr. Staff, to stick? You understand that? Then what is your response to if you and Officer LaFleur were going to work together to help cover up this minuscule amount of cocaine that was found, why you wouldn't have read his report first? You understand what I'm asking?
Yes.
If you were going to collude with someone, wouldn't you have read his report first?
Yes.
But are there things in his report that are not factual?
Yes.
What are some of those things that are inaccurate in Officer LaFleur's report that are not consistent with what we even saw in the video?
That I located the knife.
Okay. Does Officer LaFleur claim to have found the knife?
Yes, on the second page, on the first paragraph, I would say, at the end there, where it stated that I located Officer Goins, located 2 plastic bags containing a white powdery substance, see supplement, and then I located a knife in his front right pocket.
Okay, is the locating the knife in the right front pocket consistent with what the video that Mr. DeRozier's played?
No,
Who found the knife?
I did.
Who took the knife away from Mr. Staff?
I did.
So again, if you were going to collude, as the chief has alleged, or to fabricate and lie about this, wouldn't it make sense that you would have made sure and read Officer LaFleur's report before you submitted it?
Yes, if I was going to include with it.
But you're telling us under oath that this supports you didn't see his report before you wrote your narrative, did you?
Yes, that is. But
Is that
yes,
correct?
I did not see his report before I wrote my narrative.
Otherwise, if you had read his report before you wrote your narrative, what would you have told LaFleur?
That his report was wrong and that he stated that I located the knife, not him.
I also note in Officer LaFleur's charging affidavit, do you see in the middle of the page under charges?
Yes.
What are the charges listed there?
Possession of cocaine, resisting officer without violence, and breach of the peace/disorderly conduct.
Is there anything about a trespass listed there?
No.
You remember when Mr. DeRozier's played the BWC audio and we hear the words 27A and Mr. DeRozier asked you what a 27A was?
Yes.
And what was your answer?
That is a trespass warning.
Okay, and who was asking for the trespass warning? Or who mentioned the 27A first?
Officer LaFleur.
So we don't see 27A on this report, though, do we?
No.
In fact, isn't it consistent with policing, proper policing, you list the most serious charges?
Yes.
And why is that?
Because it's the most serious charge.
Have you ever heard of the term lesser included offense? Like if you have one offense and there's things that are less serious fall
Yes.
under it?
Yes.
And also that leads me to ask you about the whole notion of, do you remember Mr. DeRozier asking you about what was called in? And you said, that's when you said, when you asked for a case numbers. Remember that? Remember that testimony?
Yes.
And I believe you said, who was it that asked for case numbers?
Officer LaFleur.
And he asked for a 27A, correct?
Correct.
Are case numbers, the case numbers that are called out, was it your experience? I know you were only 9 months on the job before this incident, correct?
That is correct.
From your limited time, though, in those 9 months, are case numbers called out that may not include all the charges?
Correct.
And can you explain for Mr. Finnegan what you mean by that?
You would put, when you call for, say, in this case, you ask for 2 case numbers. You would say one for the 27A and like Officer LaFleur said one for narcotics. You wouldn't tell them ask, oh, put also resisting and disorderly conduct under that call. Is that what you're asking?
Yes. Okay. And I want to ask you to turn into the white notebook, since this charging affidavit mentions resisting without violence. So in the white notebook, if you would look. You can turn all the way back to tab 39. I'm going to ask you about the first charge listed under possession of cocaine by Officer LaFleur on his charging affidavit. That was resisting without violence.
I'm on 39.
Does this appear to you to be the Florida Statute 843.02, resisting officer without violence?
Yes, that's what it appears to be.
Do you have any reason to doubt that this is or was the law on the night of this incident
Yes.
in terms of resisting without violence?
No, I have no doubt.
Okay. And that's the very statute number that we see on the charging affidavit by LaFleur, correct? 843.02?
Yes.
And if you need to, you can keep Mr. DeRozier's, the city's exhibits open in front of you. And would you agree he listed 843.02?
Yes.
Okay. Now, if you'll turn back to tab 32 in the white notebook. Oh, at this time, Your Honor, I'd like, Your Honor, sorry, have it. This time, Mr. Finnegan, Arbitrator Finnegan, I'd like to move into evidence this statute.
I generally don't think I'm going to have an objection to this document, but it's my understanding that he's going to be limiting his questioning to the scope of my direct, and ordinarily you would be introducing your own exhibits during that process, right? I mean, aren't we limited to the topics that I
Well,
sorry, I want to address it to the arbitrator. My apologies here.
If I may, my response is only because you went to the charging affidavit on direct, and the charging affidavit listed this very numbered statute. That's why I'm asking him about it.
Yeah, I have no particular objection to this document.
I mean, I can wait to introduce it later if that's the preference, but
That's fine.
Okay. Hearing no objection to Exhibit 39 in the white notebook, which is grievance exhibits, Exhibit 39 is entered into evidence.
will it be entered as grievance 1 or 39?
It's up to you what order you like it to keep it in. I would keep it in.
I'd like to keep it in the order if that's okay. Okay.
Yes.
Yes, please.
Okay.
So we'll be keeping these
All right.
exhibits, even though we're not doing it in numerical sequence. It's 39 in the exhibit notebook, so we'll call it Exhibit 39 in the
Okay.
record for purposes being in
Okay,
clarity
thank you.
for all of us.
Thank you. And I just want to ask you about one other set of statutes, then we'll move on to something different. If you'll turn to tab 32 in the white notebook.
I'm on 32.
Okay. And you recall that in the affidavit, charging affidavit again, the number 3 charge is breach of peace / disorderly conduct, and there's a reference 877.03. Do you see that, sir?
Yes, I did.
Okay. What you have in front of you is the breach of the peace disorderly conduct statute. Do you see that, sir?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Now, you also told us on direct testimony that you believed there's a lot of testimony about what you saw and when you saw it, but at some point you saw what you thought was some pulling away by Mr. Staff. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And when someone is being detained by an officer, what crime could that constitute?
The resisting.
Okay. And if you'll turn to the next page behind tab 32, well, we looked at resisting, but at some point, did you make a determination that Mr. Staff may have exhibited signs of disorderly intoxication?
Yes.
Was that also one of the potential violations of law that Mr. Staff was engaged in when you came upon the scene?
Yes.
Are you familiar with both of these statutes, the breach of the peace, disorderly conduct, and the disorderly intoxication statute?
Yes.
At this time, Your Honor, Mr. Arbitrator, I'd like to move into evidence these 2 statutes.
That's the 2 under tab 32.
Yes, sir.
Mr. DeRozier.
No objection.
The exhibits under tab 34 are admitted. I'm sorry?
As 33.
Yes.
My next, let's move up to the podium here. I'm going to need to go up here now. Just a moment. Okay, Mr. Goins, I'm going to ask you now some of the questions specifically about the BWC of you and your fellow officer that night. First of all, when you arrived upon the scene, and by that I mean when you first pulled your vehicle to the curb, I guess facing traffic, correct?
Yes.
Told us. And I believe you said the reason you did that is because you saw an officer that needed assistance, and did that factor into your decision to park on that side of the road?
Yes.
And what is your understanding as to why that would be a good idea or part of your police training?
Call it, say, tactical advantage, or it'd be if we needed to support where my car's across the street and we needed something, I would put myself in harm's way if I parked across the street. And say parallel with northbound traffic, I parked on the opposite side of the street, driving behind also enforcement.
And in so doing, by the way, this is approximately 1 a.m.
Approximately.
on January 20th of 19.
Yes.
And we see in the video, it looks like it's raining a little bit or misting, is that right?
Yes.
Was there much traffic on the street?
Not that I recall. If not, I think maybe I saw 2 cars in fact there.
So it was fairly deserted, is that fair to say?
Yes, that's fair to say.
And one thing I noticed that Mr. DeRozier did not ask you was when you got the call, or you responded to the CAD, I don't know if I'm using proper terminology, when you heard of the disturbance, were you moving at a fairly high rate of speed to get there?
Yes, that's I recall.
And I believe you told Mr. DeRozier you were coming north on Woodland Boulevard, is that correct?
Yes.
And I believe this bar, the Boulevard Bar, is just up here around the corner, is that correct?
Yes.
So you were coming from south to north on Woodland.
Yes.
Now, in the CAD report, which you recall Mr. DeRozier is asking some questions about that,
Yes.
I believe, and I think you had that admitted into evidence, didn't you, Alex? The actual CAD report?
I don't think so, sir.
Okay. When you were responding, what did you understand the nature of the call was about?
There was disturbance with the subject with a hostile weapon.
Okay. Did you know what type of weapon?
Not that I can recall. I believe it said, I believe it said in CAD 9.
Okay.
I'm sorry, it's in CAD.
CAD.
Commuter on.
CAD.
I know, but I thought you said a word after that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. So you believe, I understand we're going back almost 3 years, but you believe, you heard there was a male with a possible possession of a weapon, correct?
Yes.
And at some point you recall that you believe it was a knife?
Yes.
The reason I ask is that I'm so, and Alex, I know you have both videos here, so. Is that the one?
They should be listed before.
Okay, gotcha. All right, I'm going to play, just want to walk you through Mr. LaFleur's again. Get the volume up. So turn it down just a little. Okay. So, the first thing I want to ask you about is, obviously Officer LaFleur cuffed Mr. Stack. Is that correct? Is that your understanding from watching this?
Yes.
And he's cuffed him behind his back, correct?
Yes.
I understand Mr. LaFleur had only been on the force, I say the force, I mean within the department, just a very few months, is that correct?
That is correct.
Even shorter than your 9 months.
Yes.
So we also hear him, he was your partner that evening, or at least on this call. Sounds like he has to command him a couple of times. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would agree with
And we see the officers, I don't know if it's right or left hand, presume maybe it's his left, looks like he's got a watch on or something, kind of turning Mr. Staff and has him up under his arm or armpit area. You see that?
that. Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna let it run here for a moment. Now, at least from my observation, I've already seen his BWC turn about 90 degrees. That would be consistent with somebody swaying or pulling. Do you see that?
Yes.
I mean, he was just 2 seconds ago facing the 3 individuals outside the bar, wasn't he?
Yes.
Suddenly, he's now looking south down Woodland, isn't he?
Yes.
Is that consistent with someone resisting from your experience?
Yes.
We also see right here, you see me circling that? That light, the bright spot? Right there? You see that, sir?
Yes, I can see it.
Do you know if that's your vehicle or not?
I cannot tell.
Is it possible?
Possibly.
Did Lieutenant Milan and his meticulous internal affairs investigation ever ask you that, if this was your car?
No.
Okay, so we've already seen Mr. Staff now turn or be turned, you would agree,
Yes.
at least like a 90-degree turn, correct?
Yes.
And this could be your vehicle, but you're not sure.
Yes, based right now, it's still.
Okay? And we see that is that 55532, correct?
Yes.
Over here.
Okay? Now, it looks like he's walking towards this, what we can now see is a police vehicle, right?
Yes.
Is that possible that was Mr. Officer LaFleur's vehicle?
Yes.
Okay.
Look at the wall. Look at the wall.
Okay. He's now had to tell Mr. Staff twice to look at the wall. Correct?
Yes.
Could that be consistent with someone resisting?
Yes.
Otherwise, why don't they do it on the first time, you ask them? Would you agree that that's reasonable to expect,
Yes.
unless someone's resisting?
Yes.
Okay. It also looks like there's a hand there. Do you know if that's Officer LaFleur's hand with the red and blue looking like a band on the wrist?
Yes.
Can I just object for 1 second? Can we possibly note for the record, while he's asking the questions, the timestamps as to what's occurring in the video, so at least we can get the timeframes for the
Okay.
questions that he's asking?
This is at 5:55:42. You see that, sir? On the-
Yes.
on the
I see
video?
the
Okay.
back.
And it looks like a finger is, the right index finger is extended by Officer LaFleur, correct?
Yes.
Is that consistent with having to use a touch or some sort of means to control the person?
Yes.
Put your hand behind your back.
So he's already told him, you saw, to face the wall twice, and now he's having to tell him to put his hands behind his back, correct?
Yes.
Wouldn't you reasonably expect as a police officer, if you tell someone to face the wall, you shouldn't have to, I mean, they should know to put their hands behind their back? If they're getting cuffed? Isn't that consistent?
Yes.
And Mr. DeRozier didn't ask you, but it needed to be asked, but what is the reason why police officers might cuff someone while they're conducting an investigation and getting information?
For their safety and ours.
Not only for the officer's safety, but for the public, correct? Doesn't necessarily mean the person's under arrest, necessarily, does it?
No.
But it could be
Yes.
that they're under arrest, right?
Yes.
Okay. By now, we see a second light. You know if that's your car behind his?
Yes, that is mine.
And we don't know how long it's been there, do we? By the time we just had this couple of seconds, correct?
Correct.
Let's back that up.
You're just me and the chamber.
Okay, see that? We can back it up a little bit.
Put your hand behind your back.
Okay. Don't know if you're there yet. It's kind of hard to tell.
Look at the wall. Look at the wall.
Okay? Looks like a light right there, doesn't it?
Yes.
That would have been within, any estimate? 100 yards, maybe? Any way to estimate?
No, there's no way that's.
Lieutenant Milan never showed you any measurements, did he?
No.
When he brought you in for your second interview?
No.
In fact, some of the calculations I heard you kind of say, I didn't know there was going to be math or something like that in one of your answers to his question. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Kind of questions that Mr. DeRozier was asking you. Lieutenant Milan didn't ask you those questions, did he?
No.
He was the investigator in this case, correct?
That is correct.
Put your hand behind your back.
Looks like, just missed it by a fraction of a second, but it looks like we saw a vehicle coming up there. Did you see that?
Yes.
And this is consistent with the same time that we hear Officer LaFleur telling him to put his hands behind his back in a little more agitated voice, isn't it?
Yes.
Because later on, correct me if I'm wrong, we see Officer LaFleur not saying much at all, very non-communicative with you. Is that right?
Yes.
But he certainly sounds a little agitated here, doesn't he?
Yes.
Would that be consistent from your experience with dealing with a suspect who is resisting?
Yes.
You have to raise your voice sometimes?
Yes.
Is that a trained technique for compliance?
Yes.
You ever heard the term verbal judo?
Yes.
Is that used in policing?
Yes.
So at the moment, what we just saw, you were well past Indiana Avenue light, weren't you?
Yes.
At the time we just saw your lights in the picture here, and Officer LaFleur telling him to put his hands behind his back and getting agitated.
Yes.
So this 6 seconds or 5:38, 5:55:38 that Mr. Rogers was asking about, that's just an estimate on your part, correct?
Yes.
We're looking at the video now, and we saw your lights enter the scene just a couple seconds ago, correct?
Yes.
And you're certainly well within 300 yards there, aren't you?
Yes.
And you told us that you were a trained marksman with the DOC?
Yes, sir.
And how far can you hit a target?
Up to 1,000 yards.
And you've been trained on that?
Yes.
You've got a certificate illustrating your proficiency in that area?
Yes, and instructor.
I could move to introduce that now, Mr. Arbitrator, but if Mr. Rogers would like, I can wait to do that tomorrow. That's the preference. No objection.
What tab in the?
That would be tab 41. You're looking right
41
now,
is a
sir.
bid. Exhibit 41.
Yes, sir. Do you recognize that document, sir?
Yes, sir.
Can you, for the record, the court reporter, Mr. Finnegan, tell us what that is?
That's a AMTAG less than lethal system and a certification of completion that completed 32 hours of law enforcement and continuing education for precision marksman instructor. That's completed on 9/13/2014.
And is that something you stay consistent with in requirements of any ongoing training?
Yes, it was. We had to do a quarterly wall, so every 3 months while I was at Department of Corrections.
And when you were with the Department of Corrections for, I believe it was more than 10 years, right?
Yes.
Were you a marksman for the DOC?
Yes.
Is another term for that sniper?
Yes.
So you have to have pretty good eyesight for that?
Yes.
What eyesight specifications do, or vision specifications you currently have?
I have 2010 or 2015.
Do you have any doubt, as you sit here today under oath, because the chief doesn't believe you, he didn't believe you, that's why he recommended you fire you. Do you have any doubt that you saw what you saw that night?
No, I have no doubt.
Do you have any doubt that you saw what appeared to you, as a reasonably prudent police officer, that Mr. Staff was resisting the orders of your officer, the fellow officer, Officer LaFleur?
No, I have no doubt.
And you stand by that testimony today under oath?
Yes.
What reason would you have to lie about it?
I have none.
I mean, you wouldn't be sitting here today. I mean, you could be fired for lying, correct?
That is correct.
What would you gain by lying about Mr. Staff, who ended up having, what, 2 tiny, tiny little baggies of cocaine? Is that correct?
That is correct.
Do you know what the amount was that was found on him?
I believe it was 0.02 or 0.2 grams, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. 12 baggies contain 0.2 grams of white powder substance.
I know you're not a prosecuting attorney. Do you have any idea what that may have even carried in terms of a sentence?
No, no idea.
Is it a fairly small amount, is it fair to say?
Yes.
Now, I'm going to let this play again just for the point of your initial verbal exchange on the curbside here with Officer LaFleur.
You're just the entertainment. Why? So he, got an altercation with
Altercation. Did you hear that word?
Yes.
Who uttered that word, altercation?
Also look forward.
What can an altercation mean? Here you are coming up on the scene. Correct me if I'm wrong, I'm going to set the stage. All you know is you hear over dispatch that there's a disturbance, male, possibly in possession of a weapon, possibly a knife. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You see your fellow officer. You've already told us you perceived some resistance by Mr. Staff, correct?
Yes.
And now he's told you an altercation with some of the staff or patrons at the boulevard, correct?
Yes.
But what can an altercation mean to you as a police officer?
Verbal, can mean assault, battery, multiple physical and verbal.
Okay? The word altercation could mean assault. And you understand that is putting someone in fear of imminently bodily harm?
Correct.
And a battery is a offensive touching against someone's will?
Yes.
So altercation could encompass both of those.
Yes.
So that's all you know at this point from your partner on the scene is that there was an altercation allegedly inside the Boulevard Bar, correct?
Yes.
You got an altercation altercation with the bartender.
Altercation, now he said it a second time. Altercation with a bartender. Did you hear that?
Yes.
This is now the second time. Did you hear the word altercation? Is that correct?
Yes.
Would you agree now Officer LaFleur is being more specific? He went from altercation, could be anybody, to altercation with the bartender, right?
Yes.
So come over here. Listen, listen. We should talk. How much have you had to drink tonight?
Now, is this you talking to him? My understanding, that's your voice, correct?
Yes, that was my voice.
And probably you and the chief know this, and retired officer Greg Cook know this, but for the rest of us who haven't been police officers, a law enforcement officer has a right to conduct an investigation out in the field, don't they?
Yes.
They have a right to ask questions and try to determine facts and information, correct?
Yes.
You're doing your job here, right?
Yes.
You're trying to find out what this character is up to and what he has been up to, right?
Yes.
Are you on any medication or any kind of drug? Because you're acting impaired. You just wanted to...
Now, why, as a reasonably prudent police officer, are you asking those questions?
Because of how I started speech.
Is it in part for his own safety?
Yes.
You're trying to find out if he's on medication or drugs or drunk or whatever, right?
Yes.
Think for your well-being. Don't worry about it. I've been drinking.
In fact, you just said the words well-being, didn't you?
Yes.
You meant his well-being, is that right?
Yes.
Smell like it. You had anything to drink. Where are you coming from? What's there? Yeah, but...
So this guy's so out of it, he can't even tell you where he's been, correct?
Correct.
He just said, there, right?
Yes.
He didn't turn and point to the Boulevard Bar, did he?
No.
He's got his hands behind his back, right?
Yes.
For the record, that's Officer LaFleur coughing, right?
Yes.
Okay.
All right.
Is Officer LaFleur talking?
So what?
He just got really drunk. And then I was gonna leave 3 times. He wouldn't leave, but I was playing. I said, "Can you please leave?" He thought it was a joke. Like, come outside, faggot. I'm like,
Something Mr. DeRozier also didn't cover with you on direct, but it's a part of this video that he questioned you extensively about. This is the bartender, it turns out to be, correct?
No, this is the bar back.
Okay. And did you hear him say he wanted to, staff wanted to fight him, challenge him to fight him?
Yes.
And you later went back and got some witness statements, correct?
Yes.
And you recall that one of the witness statements said that it was either this guy or the bartender was being called a faggot by Mr. Staff.
Yes, that was what was written on the witness statement.
And Mr. Staff was challenging him to come outside and fight him, right?
Yes.
And if that bartender or that bartender backup had any belief that he might in fact get in a fight or get hit against his will, would that be an assault?
Yes.
"No, you can leave now." I called George, and then he stands out here.
Yeah, I was already
Okay.
coming here
And then
before.
he touched her. I don't know how he touched her, but he like.
He's now described a battery, hasn't he?
Yes.
He said he touched. He's pointing to the woman seated behind the pool table, correct?
Yes. I believe that's correct.
He's just told you that he witnessed a battery, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, hang on. Mr. Wilson, I didn't mean to interrupt, but is this Mr. LaFleur talking to the bar
Yes.
back or Mr. Goins?
Yes, Mr. Arbitrator. This is Officer LaFleur's BWC.
Okay, so you asked Mr. Goins, was it he that had just asked if if staff had touched the woman behind her.
No, I meant, that LaFleur is talking to this either bartender or barback person, and he's describing that the woman got touched. He's telling LaFleur this information.
Right, he didn't tell Mr. Goins that. I thought your question was he had told Goins that.
Oh, right, no, we're not there yet. He hasn't told Goins that.
Tap or something, and then he touched he's just trying to provoke a problem.
Did he hit anybody? Like,
He didn't strike anyone.
so he hasn't broken the law.
He's just being
Okay, do you want trespass with him?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, you've watched this now a few times. You're over dealing with Mr. Staff, correct?
That's correct.
Can you even hear any of this conversation?
No.
You're dealing with Mr. Slurred Speech guy over there, right? And do you hear LaFleur kind of guides them to just a trespass? He's saying, so this guy didn't really break the law, you just want to trespass him? He like plants the seed in their mind, right?
Yes.
He tells them what he thinks they want. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
He says, you just want to trespass him. The reason I want to play that again,
Law. He's just being
Okay, do you want trespass with him?
you agree from watching this, the guy working at the bar, he doesn't ask for trespass. This is LaFleur saying, you want me to just trespass him, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead and start that trespass. He's not gonna go anywhere. We're gonna let him go. We'll tell him not.
Now, LaFleur says we're going to let him go. You see that?
Yes.
But would you agree, LaFleur doesn't know what you know, and that's about what you're about to find.